place, the community place where you can join as well, and so on. And the last one is about metrics and InnerSource. So where to start from that perspective, that perhaps is another topic for the CHAOSS community. So what I can do is to start from scratch with this respect. And once you have specific questions or so, we can just interrupt me, or we can have some open discussion about what it means. I mean, we are a small number of people now, so we can have any discussion altogether. So I'm looking for the slides right now. Okay, yeah, I was messing up a bit with the slides. Okay, perfect. So yeah, let me share my screen. So I can do it here, and then I can put this. Would we have this? So I go for this. Yeah, perfect. So I'm moving some windows. So InnerSource, just a bit about me. I've been active at the InnerSource community for the last, so we're in 2024, 4.5 years. So I've been attending some of the InnerSource summits and so on since then. There are a couple of them, typically one Europe-based and the other one based in the US. This year, by the way, the summit we are having now, the next week, I will give you some references later. But next week is happening the InnerSource Summit, in this case, West Coast in the US, time zone friendly. So this is starting at 6 p.m. Central European time. And by the end of the year, by the beginning of December, we are having an InnerSource APAC time zone friendly, where there are already companies participating, and we are already running that. So if you are interested, you can join us, or you can join this other one. So one of the main discussions nowadays is about that software is eating the world, because any company, no matters who's building what they are building or making or producing, there's certain software behind all of this, right? So the idea is that there is this kind of wave coming, and then we need to see this in advance. So there are, the usual references as well, the number of the budget of companies spending here, talent wars in some cases, so how to hire the best developers, so then we can make a difference between us, our company, and other companies. So the point is that this market is growing. There is a real need to hire developers, and this budget keeps growing each year, and this will keep growing during the next years for several years and even decades. So if we think about how corporations look like nowadays, not all of them, but let's say those that have been in the market for certain time, these are kind of silos of developers. So we are a geographically distributed organization. So then we have perhaps our headquarters are in Germany, but then we have offices in Japan, in Australia, in the US, in Brazil, and so on. And then we have this magnificent and glorious way of developing in a silo mode, which is a way of creating once and again the same. So if we have all of these places around the world, this may mean that we are producing, and it happens, we are producing once and again the same software. So nowadays, people are now building artificial intelligence, whatever, or maybe they are building bots, or they are building certain software. So around the world, what is happening in those large corporations is that they are building in a silo mode all of this. So basically what happens is that there is not knowledge transfer unless you go to the top, which are where you can see all of the aisles that you can cross between silos. So basically if you go to the chief level, this is where they have a lot of information. But if you're a developer or middle managers, what happens is that you need to follow, let's say, the rules, and then you need to produce certain software. And this software is produced one and again, right? So one of the goals of InnerSource is about breaking those silos and fostering collaboration across all of these organizations. So we are moving from a world where typically and initially we are growing our piece of power, let's say, somehow, if you're a manager, by taking others areas, let's say. So you're a manager, you are growing because you are taking other areas. So that means that other people are leaving those. While in this case, what we want to do is to break those silos. So basically what we are trying to do is to grow the cake. So in this case, there are certain similarities with open source, which is we are trying to grow the cake all together. So then there's enough food for everyone in a community or so, right? So one of the goals of InnerSource is about breaking those silos. If we think about developers, this is how the usual developer works nowadays. So I mean, I've been talking to some friends and colleagues, and they are kind of hiding the software because they are not really proud of the software. Perhaps because they don't have the right tools. Perhaps because they don't follow the rules as they should. And the main thing is that one piece of code that they created, this will be there, and then no one else will take care of this. So you produce something, and then everyone forgets about that. And that's a problem. If we think again about open source and perhaps the Linux kernel, we have a history of 30 years, right? Almost 30 years next year. And everyone that has participated at the Linux kernel is proud of this, right? So why is this not happening in corporations? And there are some studies, I think it was Forbes, that said 70% of the people at large corporations are disengaged at work. So let's think now about FOSDEM. So FOSDEM is one of the largest open source conferences, right? So this takes place in Brussels, and CHAOSS and other conferences are collocated around FOSDEM too. We see there from time to time.
I'm curious, is the group here familiar with FOSDEM? Willem?
Okay, so FOSDEM is a large open source conference taking place in Brussels at the beginning of February.
Yeah, it's one of the largest gatherings of actual developers doing developer things I think I've ever seen. In fact,
Yeah.
It is by far the biggest I've ever seen.
I know this thing.
Okay.
Oh, by the way, Son, DX is digital transformation.
Thank you.
So let's think about FOSDEM. So I've been attending FOSDEM for the last 12 years. Yeah, 13 years. So that's a long time. I've been there 13 years in a row. Sometimes I've been there because I was paid by the company I worked for or the research group I worked for before or so. And in some other cases, I paid it by myself. So we are talking about a place that is really cold, the beginning of February, maybe snowy sometimes. But there's a lot of engagement, right? And open source communities is around engagement. So the question here around InnerSource, and this is what InnerSource is about bringing lessons learned from the open source world into large corporations for different reasons, right? Some of them are just about breaking silos so then we can learn how other communities are building software. In some more cases, it's because we want to get our developers ready to participate in the open source world like this. Because if we are working in the same way internally, that means that we can work in the same way outdoors. So then we are just a click away to say this is now open source, because we don't need to go through marketing, legal, security, or any of them. We are working in the same way, right? So just to clarify, InnerSource is not open source. So it's like producing open source within the walls of your corporation, and that's all. And beyond those walls, you can see that software as proprietary software, is private software, and this is produced internally in the company. The thing is about producing the software as open source software is produced. Because if we go for large corporations, we are talking about perhaps 5,000 developers, 6,000 developers, even more. And those are numbers that we can see in some other communities as CNCF. Well, CNCF, they have some more. But we are talking about the level of tens of thousands of developers or thousands of developers. So if this is working in the open source, why this is not working internally? Yeah. Any comments so far? No comments? Okay, well, so this is kind of the idea, right? So lessons learned from developing open source software and apply them to the way companies develop software internally.
And I think from prior discussions, Daniel, this group is really interested in understanding what kinds of methods you have seen companies use to sort of enhance the motivations of one department to contribute software to another department, because the internal financial dynamics in a corporation are different, of course, than open source. Mm-hmm. And I think that's I think this group is at the place where how do they do that part of it?
Yeah. Let's think for a second about what employees are interested in. So we are engineers, so we like solve things, right? So we like to fix stuff and so on. However, what's our usual way of working? So we have certain bureaucracy. We have to work in the projects that we are, let's say, suggested or ordered in somehow. So there is certain lack of motivation. So this disengagement is something that it's happening. What we've seen so far is if we work in a more open way internally, again, remember we are producing open source, but within the walls of the organization. The promises, say, are, well, first, we can work on our own skills, soft skills in the sense that we need to communicate more to others, we need to collaborate with others and so on, and hard skill because you can go to potentially any project that might be interesting for you, and then you can go and say, I'm gonna learn Go or I'm gonna learn C++. So you are improving your skills, you are working in a more dynamic environment, as we can see in any open source community. You are allowed to test things. You can create your own repositories. You are fostering innovation somehow. So there are certain references, but it's quite interesting. The PayPal case with JavaScript. Well, they migrated from Java to JavaScript, and this was run by one hired developer. And then basically what we are doing is we are empowering developers to run this. So in one of the from Victoria perspective, we ran some surveys in some projects we had related to InnerSource, and there is a gap between what a middle manager thinks and what a developer thinks in terms of what they would like to see when participating, perhaps in an InnerSource project or in other internal community things. Because managers think that developers want to have more money, while if you ask developers, they are really interested in having more time to participate in those projects and having certain rewards as perhaps attending conferences, training, etc., etc. So one of the first steps is about trying to polish that gap and trying to understand both worlds and say, okay, there's certain time to fix all of this. Did I answer more or less the question, Sean?
Yeah, I learned a lot. Willem, did you have any follow-up questions?
Excuse me, Daniel. Okay, go ahead, William.
Go on, you
Okay.
first.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. Excuse me, Daniel. As you know, is there any disadvantage, the InnerSource disadvantage for the company?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with that respect, that's a good question because that was the previous slide. Yeah, so the promises again, and well, this is happening in some companies already doing InnerSource. Is first let's think we are breaking the silos of development, right? So you remember those silos. If we break them, suddenly we have perhaps 5 agile teams that are working, that can work in the same project. So we don't have 5 people, we have 25 people. So we have
Yeah.
a bigger project, a bigger number of developers. So we can work all together. So probably we can go faster. That's one thing. If we keep working in the same way, there are of course a lot of constraints. So this is kind of related to the fourth item that you can see here, which is you can decrease development and maintenance cost, because part of those developers can go to another project, right? To some other interesting things. Then, surprisingly, there are organizations that are not using, let's say, modern tools in the sense of, for instance, using the concept of pull request. So they are not having a proper scenario where they have code review activities, and they don't have a proper scenario with continuous integration and continuous deployment. Those has been heavily used by the open source community in the last, we can say, 5 years, 10 years. This is another thing, because if you start doing code review, if you start having a proper pipeline for CI/CD, what you are doing at the very end is first increase the code quality, and second, you are spreading the knowledge around your technology with the rest of the organization, because everything is going to be open, so then everyone can access there and have a look at this. So there are more eyes having a look at the code that you have internally. If we have more eyes, we have more people, we have better tools. What happens, not at the beginning, but in the medium term, is that the time to market is going to be faster. So you are going to be faster than before. And finally, if we allow developers to work part of their time in certain projects that are more appealing to them, then what we are doing is we are increasing engagement. So the idea here is, if we think about how team A has to contribute to team B if they are from different business units, typically what happens is that there is someone, middle manager, asking for certain changes, and then team A produces the code and say to team B, hey, we've done this for you, so please integrate this or have this integrated in the project. The first probably step for team B is, oh, this is the first time you are talking to me. You have not read, you don't have any idea about guidelines. You have no idea about requirements. You have no idea about how we are working. This piece of code is massive, is huge. I cannot review all of this. So what happens is that everything gets blocked. And then after a while, the middle manager will ask again, team A, hey, have you produced this? This is not still merge, right? So, and team A will say, oh, no, we released the software. So then team B is the one that needs to integrate this. So what happens is, okay, we need to go in the hierarchy up, right? So then this is what we call, and then, so we move to the other business unit when we reach the top, and then we have to go down. So this is what we call at the InnerSource Commons the cheese interface. So you need to go through the holes that you have in the cheese just to reach the other team. What happens is that team B will be forced by the manager in the second business unit to integrate those changes. And what in reality, what happens is that they will say, okay, this code is not good enough. Then we have this concept of not invented here as well. And then they will produce the code from scratch. And then, of course, this is done. We have several problems here about this way of working that companies are working nowadays. First, team A and team B, they don't know how to collaborate together, and they have not learned, right? We are still in the same situation as before. That's one thing. And the second thing is that team B will not receive further contributions. So they need somehow to teach others how to produce software. If we think again about open source, what we have in the very first, what we are all looking at the same time is a README file, installation file, requirements, etc. We are missing this internally in some corporations. So what we need to do is, if I'm going to any of your houses, you will ask, oh, please use these flip-flops. And if you don't mind, bring a bottle of wine and perhaps some pastries, because we'll have at the very end. And these are good behaviors, right? So it's about being polite. So if I go to your house, then I try to behave in a good way, because you are my friend, right? So open source communities is like this. So you need to read certain documentation, you need to be aware of the README, etc., etc. But you need to produce that in advance. So for this, at the InnerSource Commons, we have defined altogether a set of roles that needs to be kind of predefined when started the InnerSource journey that will help, that will facilitate all of this process. So we are talking about the trusted committer, which is kind of the concept of committer in organizations, in open source. But those committers, those trusted committers are kind of the gatekeepers. So those are the reviewers, those are the ones producing documentation. Those are the ones producing the guidelines. Those are perhaps even the ones running internal hackathons about those projects. And we need to move, to change our minds. And instead of having developers and middle managers and project managers and so on, we are having like developers talking together, even if they are from different business units. And then we are moving to a place where we will need kind of the concept of community manager from the open source world, but internally, right? So, so yeah, these are more or less the advantages for the company. Did I answer the question?
Yeah,
I
thank you.
yeah, I mean, I learned a lot myself.
I think we had another question, right?
Someone else did start to ask a question at the same time as well.
Well, so I keep going then.
Yeah.
So then we have advantages for companies, we have advantages for developers, and then again, InnerSource is not Agile or Scrum, but InnerSource is we are seeing that InnerSource is a good way to scale teams. So the point is, oh, you are doing Agile, so then you need to remove Agile and start with InnerSource or DevOps or so. That's not the case. InnerSource is mainly about fostering that collaboration, breaking the silos and everything. So if you think about how Agile teams work, so you have a bunch of people working together, and Agile is really, really good to be productive. Open source is not perhaps that good way to really be productive and really be fast. But what you are doing is you are becoming more resilient as a company if any of your members leaves the company. So each of the areas, they have its advantages. So I would say that if you think about InnerSource is kind of another layer that you can add on the top of your Agile teams or DevOps teams and so on, and try to work together in different ways. There are certain things that will produce certain friction, as for instance, the idea of Agile teams is to be all together in the same room. So then each of the members know each other, etc. For instance, some companies in InnerSource, they are breaking that idea and introducing other member teams from a different geographical, from a different country, for instance. So they need to work in the same way, in Agile way, using sprints, etc., but they need to work in a geographically distributed way. And what you are forcing here is in somehow creating other types of artifacts. So you need to produce documentation, for instance, not for the final customer, which is in the Agile team or from time to time, but documentation, internal documentation for developers and users in your company. So it's about, so there are certain mind changes that we need to do, but I see InnerSource as totally complementary with Agile or DevOps. And then some principles, and then I finish with the introduction to InnerSource. So first of all, and this is kind of the way everyone is starting their InnerSource journey. So the most important thing is this is a cultural change. So I remember years ago, when I was working at the beginning of my career, the perception I had is if you hide knowledge or code, then you start having certain power. While nowadays, if you think about how open source works, if you share with others, if you collaborate, if you help, if you mentor others, is the way you are having certain traction. So you are gaining kind of merits, right? So you are getting known in the community. So we need to do this cultural change. And even there are companies that are thinking about source code as an asset, something that you can sell and buy. While in open source, if you think about how this works, it's not something that you are selling or buying, right? So what is important is the service, the final service that you are getting, because there are other companies producing that service, right? The source code is something that you are producing all together in the same time. So we need this cultural change. So the first thing is about communication. So you may start with basically creating specific communication channels that are open in the company, right? So then people will start sending emails and so on, or maybe you are using Slack to foster that communication. And if you think about how this works, this communication, this is going to lead to the concept of transparency, because the more you are doing this communication, making decisions, announcing things, you are becoming more transparent. If you start becoming transparent, people have opinions. And the good thing about having opinions is that you will have a lot of people that may come to your project, to your way of working, to your decisions, to your thread, and start a discussion there. Of course, we all may have flames at some point. This happens in open source. This will happen internally. Um, but this is a good way to collaborate. So we have these communication channels, then we could become transparent and so on. Then you will have collaboration. And then after collaboration, if we start collaborating, as for instance in CHAOSS, what we are creating is a community. So we have a community of practitioners, in this case, interested in metrics. So we may create communities, internal communities of practitioners with your specific use case around, I don't know, technologies, projects, etc., etc. And if we have community, let me use the concept of meritocracy, even when perhaps this is not the right one, but just to bring the concept that we will see after a while people that will be kind of the technical leaders that will help, right? Perhaps as technical leaders, as facilitators, as knowledge databases in their minds. So there will be people that will be around and will be known by everyone in the company because they are heavily participating in the project. And this is all based in Apache, and this is the Apache way, Apache Software Foundation. Indeed, this you should have a look at the presentation by Jim Jackman in terms of the Apache way and InnerSource. It's really interesting, and he's talking about this path. And very important that we've seen when people start doing InnerSource. First is about the people and culture, then we improve the processes, and then we have the tools. Because what we've seen sometimes is that there are companies that started directly, for instance, with GitHub Enterprise or GitLab or Atlassian Stack, any tool that allows collaboration. And because they have this, they say, oh, we are fostering collaboration, and basically nothing happens. This is part of your comments about how can we engage and motivate developers to be part of this. So, well, first we need to start discussing about the people and culture. And part of the next step is about this people and culture. So what I'll do is to close this presentation. There are some more slides. Oh, this might be important. So at the InnerSource Commons, so there are some resources. You have some books. Please go there. They are free. They were sponsored by PayPal. Yeah, let me share this here. And the first one is about getting started with InnerSource. And this is mostly PayPal's experience when running InnerSource Office back like starting 5 years ago or so, earlier, I remember. Then we have the Understanding the InnerSource checklist. So this is done by Silona Bonwald. She has participated from time to time at CHAOSS community, and she really loves checklists. So I would recommend, if you are doing InnerSource, go and have a look at this. And then for the adopting InnerSource principles and case studies, these are different companies that have been running InnerSource. So these are case studies that you can have a look at this. And finally, managing InnerSource project. This is a collaborative book that we started initially in Vitoria. And this contains most of the, let's say, kind of introduction for InnerSource, and then metrics strategy about your InnerSource journey, and then, let's say, infrastructure friendly with an InnerSource approach kind of discussion. So these are the main areas. So there are these InnerSource books. So this is free, available for all of you. Yeah, going with this, let me now introduce a bit the InnerSource Commons and so on. So we are a foundation 503 since February. We started, so yeah, this was founded in 2015. This is the main website. You have different resources here and there. Another really interesting one is the learning path. So in the learning path, this is the goal. So one of the goals of the foundation is about educating and creating a body of knowledge around InnerSource. So in the learning path, what we have are short videos with fields about this is InnerSource. This is, for instance, the role of trusted committer. This is the role of contributor. This is the role of product owner. So this was, again, sponsored by PayPal, and this has been edited by O'Reilly. So they have really high quality. We have weekly meetings, and we are producing at the same time videos and booklets and some other resources. So again, I would recommend that you have a look here at the learning path. And then the other community is the no, this is the learning path community. Well, of course, everything is in GitHub and open source. Yeah. The other community we have is the InnerSource patterns. So a pattern is a proven solution to existing problem, and we are creating several patterns for different problems that different people in the community are facing. So as a practice that we are having, if you join the community at some point, you may face certain problems, as for instance, how to motivate developers. You can have a look at some of the existing ones. So we have some of them here. There are some of them here, structure. And then there are some others that were validated. Oh, non-validated. We have structure. Yeah. So let's go to one of them. Let's go to the, for instance, the 30-day warranty. So one of the things that you can see is that this has been proven. In some cases, there are companies that they say this has been proven internally in certain corporation, or maybe in some other cases, this is not said. So as community members, what we can do is we can be your gatekeeper, let's say. So for each of the problems that we are structuring the information into 5 main areas. So we have the context, like, okay, we have a team A that is trying to collaborate with team B, but then team B is kind of reluctant about having all of this. So how can we break those bad practices, right? So then we have the problem statement, and then we have the forces. The forces are people that are in favor of a change or against that change. That depends where you are. And then we have the solution. So going to the discussion, to the CHAOSS interface that we had before, if we are allowing developers to work to each other with each other and so on, one of the patterns that we have that have been proven, so this means it has worked successfully, is that team A wants to collaborate with team B, but then team B is kind of reluctant. So one of the solution, let's say, just to summarize here, is to give kind of a warranty period. So, okay, that's all right. So we want to collaborate. We are following the rules. We are following the guidelines. Committee approved this. So team A is giving a period of warranty to say, hey, it doesn't matter if this is 30 days or 6 months. but there is a period of warranty that if there's any bug in that area of the code, team A will go and fix that. So then now we have kind of bring some oil to the scene. We are facilitating. We are breaking those forces against. And it's pretty important to define those forces against, because what we are trying to do in the patterns is to break down them and to say those forces against, they don't exist anymore, right? As this pattern, you can see there are several of them. Another interesting one is the contracted contributor. In this case, for instance, this was applied in Robert Bosch organization, and this has been proven. Of course, you can see that there are certain acknowledgements of people that have participated, and then we have the main author. So for the contracted contributor, the problem here is, we are letting people to participate in certain projects, but we have a problem, is that they are hired to do something else in their business unit. So what can we do, right? So the solutions they had is, as they were having, let's say, a budget coming from the global services kind of, then what they were doing is they were paying that business unit for the time of that developer. So then again, they were trying to look for specific fixes to existing problems and forces against this, because what will happen is, I have a manager, and that manager has a team. So the team, basically what happens is, I need to participate. I would love to participate in that community, but I don't have the time. I don't have the resources. What can I do? So then the people from the InnerSource department or so, they can buy time. So they can buy the time for that developer. So then, of course, they cannot hire the whole developer, but perhaps certain time that can be done. So it's a way to, we do a small step, right?
So the arrows that say signs, that means the community leader, the manager, the governance officer, and the individual contributor kind of all agree that that person is going to spend this amount of their time.
Yeah.
Okay.
And indeed, there are companies that they have certain percentage of employees' time for anything, maybe open source projects, maybe internal projects, maybe, I don't know. So this is patterns. This is the learning path. Quick. Whoops. Let me go back to the website. So
this is a really great resource, this InnerSource Commons.
Yeah, definitely. For the agenda, for the InnerSource Summit, if you are interested in joining us, so this is like $35 and then you will have a t-shirt. And
these are U.S. Pacific Daylight times?
Yeah, it's
Daniel?
US Pacific. Mm-hmm. So this is, 9 a.m. We are having Team O'Reilly, which is great. And then, you can see companies talking about InnerSource, Nike, Comcast. We will have open discussions. The way of working will be, we are asking to pre-record the sessions, and then at the same time in Slack we have live discussion, chat discussions. SAP, GitHub, another keynote, and then in the breakout sessions we'll turn on the microphone and the camera, and then we'll have in teams of 10-15 people those discussions likely. We will have probably InnerSource 101, one of these channels, but it's still to be discussed. Then we are going to discuss about InnerSourcing financial services, so highly regulated markets. Some other companies, Microsoft, BBC, Daimler, Red Hat. So 3 hours and a half each day. If this is interesting for you, it would be great to see you on. More things. And then the final thing is about metrics and KPIs, which is perhaps the topic for CHAOSS. Questions, comments so far? Too many things maybe at the same time?
It's great. The InnerSource Common, I found this website several days ago, and I already recommend some URL to my colleagues. So you may already know about it. And I really appreciate, especially the learning path. It's kind of provides us very good materials to learn about InnerSource.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Sure, you're welcome. So this is community effort. So just a quick comment. So the InnerSource Commons, the summit, and the Slack channel and all the communications are under Chatham House rule. The Chatham House rule is a way to create in a safe environment for collaboration. So Chatham House rule means that if we are discussing in a private way certain topic, when we are out of this team or community, we can use the information for our own purposes. What we cannot say or indicate is which company or who said what. So in that way, we are avoiding to have bad press or good press, any type of press, basically, of, I don't know, this company has said this or they are facing these problems, because companies don't like that. So for that, in a Slack, we have this rule, and then this needs to be under Chatham. Any conversation is under Chatham House rule. At the InnerSource Commons this time, as we cannot assure 100% the security of Zoom and all of this, all of the talks are public, and indeed all of the talks will be uploaded to YouTube. So the thing about attending the InnerSource Commons is about the discussion, live discussions under Chatham House rule. So anyone for any company can bring their own experiences. And then the breakout sessions that will not be recorded, because again, they will be
Chatham House rules. Yeah.
Yeah. Private
kind of
conversations. And then
against the philosophy of Chatham House rules to record them.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, you are very welcome to join the Slack channel. So there at the innersourcecommons.org is the place for this. So
in the Slack channel, they can find on the InnerSourceCommons.com website.
Oh, can you say again?
The Slack channel, they can find that on the InnerSourceCommons.com website.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for the link. Yeah, it's here.
Okay.
So you can join the community, and then you have GitHub and everything. Are we finishing in 5 minutes or in 15?
Yes, 5. But if yeah.
So
I will try to be the timekeeper.
Thank you. Yeah, metrics and KPIs for InnerSource Office. So we have this concept, this sentence, right? I don't know if this is Lord Kelvin. Each time I look for this, basically this is assigned to different people, but basically we cannot measure anything, we cannot improve it, right?
Yeah.
That's one of the things. Or if you don't have data, you are another person with an opinion. But said all of this, nowadays that it's relatively easy to retrieve data. If you don't have an opinion, you are another person as with data. So we can play with that sentence in both ways. Oh, thank you, Sean. So first of all, at the InnerSource Commons, when we are discussing about metrics, we are trying to follow a really similar approach as in CHAOSS. So in CHAOSS, you feel comfortable with the concept of focus areas, and then we have questions, and then we have metrics. So this is following the goal question metric approach. Exactly the same as we are following in InnerSource, or what we are trying to follow as I come from CHAOSS. So this is kind of my by default way of discussing. First of all, why do we need metrics? Well, we need to be aware of where we are in our InnerSource journey. If we want to be like really close to the Apache community, for instance, or CHAOSS or any other open source community, in the way we are working nowadays, how good are we at collaboration? How good are we at engaging developers? How good are we at creating new and innovative projects? So we don't know. We have to measure all of this. And when by measuring, I don't mean just quantitative information, by qualitative as well, in the sense of having surveys, interviews with people, middle managers, chief level developers, etc. So it's about having data from all of this. That, by the way, this reminds me that there is another pattern related to maturity model. So there is already a maturity model going on at the InnerSource Commons that might be worth having a look at. So, and then once we know where we are, then we can start leading a change. So we can go from point A to point B, right? So we know that we want to improve our software delivery process in by certain time, or we want to get this number of new business units producing commits in other business units projects or so. So that depends on your specific goals. And then finally, and in some cases, it might be worth to motivate developers, to push them to do certain things, maybe developers, maybe middle managers, etc., etc. So how are we doing this? Typically following a goal question metric approach, which is what we mentioned before. In InnerSource, perhaps more than business goals, what we are trying to achieve are cultural goals. So the first thing you need to think about is what are the cultural goals you are trying to follow? Because if you first the people, cultural change, then the process, and then the tooling. So the first thing is about those cultural goals, or how to relate those to business goals. Because once we define those business goals, then we can start questioning ourselves. Where do we want to be in 6 months, for instance? And then this will help to define all of the metrics. This is about the method, right? What can we measure? And this is part of the, we can simply use this course in CHAOSS as well. So we are typically, at least in Grimoire Lab, but maybe in or you have new areas. I know you have source code analysis as far as I remember, Sean. So in this case, Grimoire Lab doesn't have it, but we can split all of this information into activity, community, and performance. Activity in the sense of having a general overview of if we start our GitHub enterprise, the engagement of those developers, the contribution, that contribution over time, the life cycle of the active repositories over time, the geographical distribution of our developers, etc., etc. If we think about the community, then we can start discussing about topics as business units diversity. We've been talking, for instance, internally in CHAOSS about organizational diversity. We can talk about the growth of contributors over time. We can talk about attraction and retention of developers, or we can discuss about who are my core developers in this project. All of these are specific analysis, use cases, or metrics that we have in CHAOSS as well from an open source perspective. The key thing is how those metrics relate to the business goals we are following, because in open source this is totally different than in InnerSource, but it happens that the metrics, hey, they are pretty the same, right? And then performance, so iterations, time to close, time to first attention, time to merge, efficiency, and then, for instance, since you have the first idea till this is deployed in customer, how much time we have. Right in the middle, we have all of the open issue, discussion, create the pull request, more discussion, reviews, iterations. Then we have CI/CD. So all of these, you can measure all of those steps. For tooling, we have CHAOSS and the CHAOSS community on the one hand. Well, this slide, as you can see, this was copied from another, so this is kind of a spam, sorry about that. So Victoria Analytics is based on Grimoire Lab, but in CHAOSS we have OR as well as another tool working in similar areas as the one I defined before. And everything is open source, so you can try these tools from CHAOSS and you can play with them and learn about how this works. And of course, there are a couple of groups as Sean and us in Vitoria that we are producing. We have commercial services, so or you can run this by yourself. It's totally up to you. And then some examples of this goal question metric approach. So, as a business goal, we are interested in increasing the adoption of the InnerSource projects within the organization. Okay, so that's the chief level asking for this. So, okay, what does it mean adoption in our company? What does it mean concept of project, right? What does it mean even organization? Because maybe you are a holding or so. So then for this, we may define a set of questions as how many people are contributing month by month. If our number of contributors are increasing, over time, for instance, what are the data sources with the lowest barrier to contribute, because this will help to bring others easily. Perhaps Slack is really easy to participate, so people say hello and then start engaging in conversations. While if you directly go to code, that's something really, really hard, right? So then we can have these discussions, and then in Grimoire Lab specifically, we have these panels that we created that might be those may be used in open source or in InnerSource. Let me present here. And then we have different data sources, organizations that can be translated into business units or projects, different data sources, and then you have the contributors over time. So those that I think attended CHAOSScon, we presented these panels, but we have the evolution of the contributors. Then we have the green bars are the periods where that specific activity has grown compared to the previous step. And so then we can see moments in time where this is green or yellow, because yellow means this is decreasing. And then we have at the bottom, we have another chart where we have, again, the evolution of contributors, and then we have the average. So the bars are telling us period of time where this is growing in terms of contributors or not. In reality, it doesn't matter the panel or the metrics you are using, because the real discussion we should have in InnerSource, and it's happening in CHAOSS as well. From that perspective, is the high-level discussion about how to translate those business goals or cultural goals or open source community goals into something meaningful in metrics. And some of those metrics, we can cover them, we can retrieve them. In some other cases, we cannot. Okay. There are some other panels in terms of repositories engagement over time. So we can see a list of repositories here. This is over time in the x-axis. And then the darkest, the more authors the more authors we are having in those. So we can see that there are certain projects with that are important in this project, no matter the project, while we have other projects that simply were abandoned because they didn't have authors at all, right? So we can see this life cycle of the projects at some point. Going back to the concept of InnerSource, and this is a chart that we retrieved from the CNCF ecosystem. So each of the dots are developers, and right in the middle we have the project. So we have Kubernetes, this big star. We have Fluent DB, we have Jagger, Open Tracing, gRPC. All of this mess. So we have, this is OpenShift. This was a project done with OpenShift. So these dots that we can see here between Kubernetes and OpenShift, these developers are working in Kubernetes and in OpenShift, right? So they are collaborating. And all of this mess here right in the middle means that collaboration. So InnerSource is about becoming this. So we want to become this mess at some point, right? We want to have this chart at some point. And InnerSource can help in all of this journey. These are some lessons learned, but we are 4 minutes to the top of the hour, so I think we can have some questions or so. Oh.
Yeah, you should stop for questions, because I do think this channel has another meeting at 10 o'clock.
Yeah, and Danny, could you share the slides with us?
Oh, definitely. So yeah. Happy to.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I really like the CNCF graph. So maybe that's our target to when we set our goals to see if the projects in my companies can have that kind of cooperation.
Yeah, definitely. So so that network analysis is a really powerful tool to have a look at a first view and say, hey, this is happening, this is us. So now where do we want to go? But this is us, right?
Yeah.
So that's important.
Yeah, and by using the data from the Git, so we can easily draw this kind of diagram.
Yeah, if you're using GitHub Enterprise or GitLab, well, this is done with Git repositories directly. So any data source that might be covered by Grimoire Lab in this case, you can produce the same thing.
Oh, good.
All right.
Well, thank you all for your time, and yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And
Thank you, Daniel.
yeah, I'm really appreciate that.